Prelude. Hey, I like making these videos and I'm trying to build my channel. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you subscribe, you'll help me build my channel and you'll get notifications if you ring the bell every time I put a video out. Thank you for watching. Hello, Fat Puppy here, and today I'm at the Sumter Cemetery, and this is in town. It hasn't always been in town. It used to be out in the country, but the town has moved and now it's in town. You will hear traffic, and you may even hear people talking in the background and lawn care equipment going, because I hear them doing some weed trimming or something in the background. Today I'm at the grave. I'm not at a church, I'm at a cemetery, and I'm at the grave of George Edward Haynesworth. Now, George Edward Haynesworth had a very interesting history in his early life and then in how he died. So this is, I guess you could say this is going to be part one and part two, but all in one video. It's just that the interest goes part one and part two. Now, he is famous in this area for being a well-known and well-liked in his time a gentleman, a lawyer, a magistrate. But before then, he was a student at the Citadel. He was a cadet. And as a cadet in 1861, he was called to fire a cannon. Now, let me tell you what happened. The Star of the West was a steamship that was coming to supply Fort Sumter, South Carolina. This was before the Civil War had started. In January of 1861, the steamship was rolling towards Fort Sumter, was passing by Morris Island, and he was ordered to fire. Now, he was not to hit the boat, hit the ship. It was a warning shot across the bow. So he was noted as the first person to fire a shot of the Civil War, when actually the Civil War didn't start a couple months later. Also, he was at the Battle of Bennettsville. It was one of the last battles of the Civil War. I believe it was at the Battle of Bennettsville where the South did not surrender, but Sherman's army took on a general, Johnston, if I remember correctly, and Johnston surrendered. And this led to the surrender of the Confederacy. So he liked to tease that he fired the first shot and he fired the last shot of the Civil War, even though the last shot was probably questionable and he was probably just kidding anyway. Unfortunately, I have to dispel a myth. There's a house on Haynesworth Street. Again, his name is George Haynesworth, George Edward Haynesworth, that I've always been told was his house. And I'm going to show a picture of it. It's a nice house, but it wasn't his house. That was the house of his uncle, who was the first postmaster of Sumter. It's in town. It's almost downtown, but it was built in 1830s, 1835, maybe 1840. And when it was built, it was out in the country. It was a farmhouse. But now it's just in town. It's a nice house, but it wasn't his house. Also, Mr. Haynesworth was a descendant of Thomas Sumter. Thomas Sumter is a local war hero here from the Revolutionary War, known as a fighting gamecock. He was a guerrilla war fighter. So he was descendant, maybe like great-grandson, I'm not sure, but he was a descendant of Thomas Sumter. I just wanted to get a better shot of his stone and read it to you. It says, George Edward Haynesworth, March 21st, 1841 to December 30th, 1887. First Lieutenant, 1st South Carolina Artillery, Confederate States of America. As a Citadel cadet, he fired the first gun of the war between the states at the USS Star of the West, attempting to enter the Charleston Harbor January 9th, 1861. As you can see, he lived to be about 46 years old. And why he died so early, we're going to talk about in just a moment. And now for part two of this video, how he died. It's an interesting way in which he died, and a lot of this I'm going to have to read to you. And though I don't like reading on camera, I want to not leave out any details, even though I'm not going to get bogged down in them neither. So there was a feud that started in Bishopville, South Carolina between a Peyton G. Bowman, who was a teacher, and John Kills, who was a lawyer here in Sumter. Kills drew up some papers, and Bowman didn't care for them. Bowman had a cousin, the same name, that was a lawyer. So these two lawyers just kind of got into it. They ended up meeting at Rosendorf's saloon in Sumter and exchanged some harsh words. Nobody was shot. The reason why I say that, because they were shooting at each other in Bishopville before. Threats were made. Threats about killing each other, and they were going to finish this thing. People were brought in, violence was promised. This was a family feud is what this was. The police were called. Everybody was detained. So Mr. Haynesworth was a magistrate, a judge. They brought him into his office, actually the courtroom. There were several people there, several witnesses, several policemen. There's a big old long deposition about who fired what and how it went down and all that. I read it. It's pretty complicated. I'm not going to read it to you. So anyway, sitting in Haynesworth Court, basically what happened was, excuse me, someone shouted out, "He's got a gun." Well, let me back a minute. Even though these people had made threats, for some reason they were not searched. So people came there with weapons, knives and guns, because all guns and knives ended up coming out in this room. Someone was about to get stabbed, someone else got shot. So basically what ended up happening was, as they started shooting each other, George Haynesworth stood up. And when he stood up, a misplaced aimed shot, a misaimed shot, struck him, and down he went, and he died. Now, the odd thing about this, other than just how the whole thing went down, was that he was a very peace-loving man, despite being the first person to fire a shot in the Civil War, the last person to fire a shot in the Civil War, and then how he died. He was very peace-loving. He was a gentle person from the articles that I read. And so this whole riot in his courtroom went against his very nature. But regardless, he died. Now, there was an inquest held, as they were trying to determine the facts. And I'm going to see if I can go over some with you. Basically what happened is everybody was arrested. The inquest was held. They went to trial. Little misjustice here as far as I'm concerned, because one of the lawyers that was the aggressors in this, his dad was the judge. So I'm saying justice wasn't served. And the reason why I say that is because nobody got locked up for it as far as going to prison. Now it could be it was because that they couldn't determine who fired the shot that killed Mr. Haynesworth. And you can't just put everybody in jail saying, well, one of those guys did it. So I'm supposing everybody got let off. Nobody served any real time over it. I do know I read the article from the paper which said that this is the darkest time in Sumter County history has ever had. And the reason why is because he was very well liked. I also read that people who were thinking about coming to Sumter had changed their mind because of the violence that took place in the courtroom. There was a singing troupe that was supposed to come by, and they canceled. There was a gentleman that was moving from the north down to Sumter, and he was, I think it was Dr. Toomey that he had wrote a letter to. Dr. Toomey was going to be his doctor, and he said he had changed his mind because he heard about the shooting, and he didn't want no part of Sumter because of that. So it cast a negative darkness over Sumter for a while because of this shooting. Mr. Haynesworth, well, I wouldn't call him a hero. He was a very well-liked man. By the way, his dying left 2 orphans, 2 little boys, because his wife had died 3 years earlier at the age of 34, just a few months after giving birth to the youngest son. Now, if I remember reading a long time ago, because I've read about this before, One of the sons, I believe, was in and out of the insane asylum. The other one became president of the National Bank of South Carolina and did very well for himself. Mr. Haynesworth had a grandson that just recently died, believe it or not. His grandson died in the year 2012 at the age of 90. He was a bishop for the Episcopal Church, moved the family to the Charleston area, and the family still lives in that area right now, in and around the Charleston area. So his descendants are alive and well, and many, from what I understand, despite the fact that the other son, who had been in and out of insane asylum, never got married. And this is the grave of Hortense Miller, who was the wife of George Haynesworth. She was born 1844, and like I said, died in 1878. The wife of the man who fired the first shot of the Civil War and who liked to tease that he fired the last shot, who unfortunately was killed at the age of 46, I believe, and she thankfully didn't get to witness that. But that's Hortense Miller, and that is her gravesite, right next to her husband.